Jason, what's up, man? Thanks for joining me.
Ryan, what's up, brother? It's been a good day so far already.
It has been good. Yeah, it has been good. We got to shoot a little bit, which was nice.
Yeah.
Now we're just hanging. We had some lobster for lunch.
Amazing. So I got the full-on Maine experience, and I was telling you that I think I've only been to Maine one other time, and it's pretty nice. I mean, it's I don't even know, what are we, mid-October, late October, and just beautiful up here. I mean, driving up to your place with the changing of the leaves and this crisp fall air.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah, it's nice now. I don't know what it's going to be like in the next month or two. I think you came at the right time of year.
Yeah.
So we're in for a treat. I think we're not used to this cold, and it's cold already for us. People are like, it's not cold. I'm like, that's relative because it's cold for us.
Yeah. Well, and here, I think that's something that a lot of people don't understand, that on the East Coast, you get the humidity in the air in the winter. And it makes a huge difference, because I have been out west many times where it's like 10 degrees and I think it's just going to be frigid, but there's no humidity in the air.
Yeah, that dryness really helps.
Yep. Whereas here on the East Coast, I mean, we get it even in Virginia. I mean, it'll be 40 degrees, but there'll be 100% humidity in the air, and it just gets into your bones.
Right. So. Well, I know you're up here to hang out a little bit, to do the podcast, but what are you doing? Because you're all over the place. I don't think you get home until the end of this month.
Yeah, this has been the busiest month I've had since I retired, and blessed. I mean, there's so many great things happening for us. So everything from speaking engagements. So I've been speaking all across the country: California, Texas, New York. And then obviously we're here.
Yeah.
And then tomorrow I head to Boston with one of the groups I'm working with, Concussion Legacy Foundation. So I'm speaking at their gala tomorrow night, or 2 nights from now. And then I fly to Iowa for another speaking engagement before I finally get home. So recorded the audiobook for Overcome in New York a few days ago. And that was a lot of fun. I think a lot of people, I mean, you and I were talking about that. A lot of people I think underestimate. And I've I mean, hell, I'm a professional speaker, and I was like, oh man, this is going to be great. And it was great, but it's funny.
Yeah.
It's just different. You quickly realize that when you are reading, Overcome is 65,000 words, and it's not, you don't think about when you're writing, gee, how is this going to come off as spoken word?
Sure.
And it doesn't always flow perfectly.
Than reading it is different than speaking it, right? So
yeah. So
how long did that take you?
We did it in 3 days, 2.5 days.
So you cranked it out.
Yeah,
that's a lot of work,
and it's mentally taxing. I will tell you,
for sure, because you're just sitting there for hours. Yeah. I know when I had to record our audiobook, I cranked it out in a matter of a couple of days, very similar to probably what you did, and I was exhausted. I cleared out my calendar. I said, I'm not doing any appointments or calls or anything in these 2 days. And I just cranked it out. And man, when you put 5, 6, 7 hours of reading, that'll beat you down. Yeah, especially, because it's your book. So
right. There are those times where you're like, man, this is an emotional moment, because, you're pouring your heart and soul into it. And, doing that, all the inflection, all of that. I mean, it's just, it's like a professional speech. I mean, you want to have that passion and that emotion. And, I was smoke checked by the every night. I'm I am done.
So tell me about the book. It's called Overcome. I know obviously you've had to overcome some tremendous adversity and challenges, but tell us about the premise of the book.
So this book is, I'm really proud of it. It has been years and years in the making, and I'll be honest, how it really came to be was, after I got injured from my battlefield injuries in Iraq in 2007, a lot of people were kind of surprised at how quickly I launched out of that incident and went on to start my own nonprofit. And obviously there was the sign on my hospital door.
Right, I want to talk about that.
Yeah, a little bit of notoriety. And,
sure.
And I just hit the ground running and never looked back. And a lot of people were like, man, how did you do that? Mm-hmm. How did you launch so quickly when so many other people have these life-changing moments that sometimes it takes some time to move forward after we've sustained major trauma? And as I work with more wounded warriors, and as I work with other individuals that have been through trauma, and then I wrote the curriculum for our Overcome Academy, the program we had in our nonprofit, all of this was kind of starting to come together, because I'll be honest, I couldn't answer that question. I would just tell people, oh, it's the Overcome mindset. But, that's a vague description.
Well, I mean, maybe yes, but you understood inside what it was, but to be able to translate it to other people is probably the disconnect, I imagine.
Absolutely. And articulate what are the steps that make that happen. And I'll be honest, I don't think I even fully understood that back then.
Yeah.
And
because it's easy to say, oh, you just do it. And somebody from the outside looking in would say, well, okay, yeah, how do you do that? You're like, what do you mean? You just do it.
Right.
Except for there's a bunch of mental scripts that you've developed through your time in the SEALs and through other experiences that have given you that attitude. And so now you're not even having to think about the formula. You're thinking, you just do it. But somebody who hasn't been in that situation is like, I don't know what that means.
And that's exactly what was happening.
Yeah,
I mean, even Wounded Warriors that were going through my program were like, hey, man, we want to do what you're doing, but how do we do it? Mm-hmm. So it forced me to finally sit down and really peel the onion back on everything that I had seen. And there were several epiphanies that occurred. One of the first epiphanies that occurred was one of the Wounded Warriors that I was working with. One of the things we encouraged them to do was get up and tell their story. One thing I knew was that by telling my story, there was healing in that. It was cathartic. And the more that I told my story, the more the dark sides of the story no longer owned me. I owned it.
Yeah.
So there was power in that, and I was encouraging other Wounded Warriors to do the same. So we had this Wounded Warrior who came to our class who had really, really struggled. And he got up and he told this heartbreaking story of how he was a medic working with the Marines. And it was early in the war, 2003, maybe 2004. And they were in an armored convoy. Vehicle in front of him rolled over an IED, exploded, major, very large IED. He got out of the vehicle to go up to the vehicle in front of him, this armored carrier. And the blast of the IED had actually twisted the frame of the vehicle. So he tried to get the door open, and the door was wedged shut. And the young Marine driver inside, the inside of the vehicle was on fire. And this medic literally watched this young Marine burn to death in front of his eyes through the window. And he went home and just checked out. Yeah. He was like, I'm done. And for 10 years,
really,
that he came back after that deployment, and he just stopped going out in the public and just really stopped living. And I had been developing this idea of, in special operations, we had been taught that if you get ambushed or if you're attacked, the only way to survive is you have to get off the X. The X being the point of attack, the point of any ambush. And it all kind of like almost a train wreck hit me in that moment. I was like, holy smokes, man, everybody gets stuck on the X. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets ambushed. And I looked at that guy and I said, dude, like, you never left that ambush in Iraq. You have chained yourself to the X.
Right.
And it just started this whole process of realizing that every single person in life gets ambushed. Everybody gets stuck on the X at some point. And the methodology to get off the X is really the same if we can put it into practical, applicable steps. And that became my journey of writing. Well, how do we do that?
Yeah.
And looking back on where I'd tell people it was the overcome mindset, I started to realize, well, dude, you actually followed these steps, and these were the things that you did. So overcome is all about that. It is about when you get hit with the unexpected hardships and adversity of life that everybody gets hit with. When you get knocked down, knocked on your ass, just the unexpected happens. How do you get out of it? Mm-hmm. How do you move forward away from it? How do you deal with that trauma, that setback, that failure, that crisis? And what are the steps you can take? So we developed a methodology called the REACT methodology. And the idea, if you get into an ambush, you have to react. Mm-hmm. And the REACT methodology is an acronym for, number one, you have to recognize. And you have to recognize you're in a crisis. And I know you saw this as a combat veteran. This is something a lot of combat veterans understand. Oftentimes you can actually be engaged by the enemy, and it takes a little while to recognize you're actually in a gunfight. You're trying to identify where's fire coming from, what's happening. And
you're trying to assess that situation, what's going on around you. It's really interesting because our physiology in a lot of ways keeps us alive in a lot of instances, but also can play tricks on us too, right? where our senses start changing and we start focusing on different things and reacting immediately as opposed to thinking logically or critically about a situation we may find ourselves in. It's kind of interesting how our bodies work that way.
Absolutely, because our senses get overwhelmed, and sometimes we have a tendency to, instead of taking a breath and looking at what's really going on, we may just hastily
engage, right?
And put ourselves in a worse situation.
Are you familiar with Colonel Dave Grossman?
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, he writes about this in his books on combat and on killing, and he talks about our physiological response to threat and how it will help us. And it also could hinder us if we're not aware of how this all plays out and works out.
Yeah, and it's so, I mean, we have a saying in the SEAL teams, I don't know if you guys, other forces use something similar, but we call it, you have to let the battlefield develop. So you have to kind of take a moment, get some cover, and evaluate what's really happening. I mean, are you only taking fire from one position, or is the reality you're taking fire from multiple positions? And, you know, if you're solely focused on this fire, you know, from over here, you don't realize that maybe I'm exposed to other fire. Sometimes people will get so focused on, they're overwhelmed by the moment. So the flip side is they hunker down and they wait too long, and they're not reacting at all.
How does this apply though to the civilian side? Because I think sometimes there's a disconnect between special forces community. Oh, you just have to react. And we're talking about taking fire from multiple positions. What would that actually look like in a civilian situation?
So in the civilian world, I mean, it comes like this. And let me take a step back so I can make it more relatable to the average civilian out there.
Yeah.
So when I look at a life ambush, I break them down into three different categories: micro, minor, and major life ambush. So a micro ambush is the one that everyone encounters all the time. Probably at least once a week, if not for some people, maybe more, depending on their personality and their makeup. But that's that little ambush, that little negative voice in the back of your mind that when you're thinking about doing something that says, no, you're not good enough. You're not good enough. You're not fast enough. You're not strong enough. You're the wrong race, creed, color, demographic, background, whatever lies that little voice in your head tells you. That's a micro ambush. And so many people live their lives pinned to the X because they believe that little voice and they're not willing to move forward and overcome that little voice. So that's one. Second one is a minor ambush. And these are what I like to define as schedule disruptions. It's something big enough that it will disrupt your life.
Right.
But it's usually nothing that lasts that long, maybe a couple of weeks, a month at most.
Maybe like you got overlooked for a promotion, or, you know, you and your wife are on the outs right now, you're in the doghouse, something like that. Is that
exactly
okay?
Or I give the example of if you're a single car family and the car breaks down.
Sure. Okay.
And now you're having to bum a ride or take public transportation or ride your bike. You know, it's
something to be dealt with. But
exactly.
But it is an annoyance.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we were to fast forward 5 years down the road and I said to you, hey, do you remember when that happened?
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah, kind of.
Right. But how many people out there allow things like that to just crush them?
Oh yeah. They think it's the end of the world.
Exactly. And they're projecting negativity all around them. They are unproductive because they've allowed this minor ambush to totally impact their life.
Before you get into the major crisis or ambush, do you think this is because people have been conditioned to behave this way and act this way? Like I think of, for example, the victim mentality. We'll go back to your car. Somebody's car breaks down, transmission goes out, and I can hear vividly somebody saying, "Oh, if I didn't have any luck, or if I didn't have bad luck, I wouldn't have any luck at all." And this kind of stuff always happens to me. And yet, you know, I think if you stepped outside of that and looked at it objectively, it's probably not the case. I think people amplify it. And if it is the case, it's probably because these people create a lot of these situations for themselves.
Yes.
Right? Like the car situation's like, okay, well, somebody who has some money set aside because they know emergencies and things come up and there'll be some unknown expenses, that's not going to derail somebody. Like our transmission on our vehicle went out. It was an annoyance, but we had some money set aside because we know things are going to come up. We paid the guy to fix the transmission. We were out of a vehicle for a couple weeks. No big deal, right? But we planned for that. But I don't know. I think a lot of people they don't plan, number one. And I think that they're conditioned to be victims.
They are. And especially, you know, it's so funny. I've frequently heard the phrase first world problems. And it is a sad state that it's true.
Yeah.
That in this nation, There are a lot of people who walk through with such poor perspective of what's going on around them. They get upset when, this isn't working right.
Right.
Or,
you even heard me today at lunch. I'm like, yeah, what's wrong with our internet?
Yeah.
As if that's the problem goes out 5 minutes.
But you didn't, you didn't allow it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it didn't totally impact you, but there are some people out there that, I watched a guy on my flight last night that we were a few minutes delayed after I'd already been delayed several times, but it was nothing. I wouldn't even classify that as a micro, but I watched this guy literally melt down in the seat next to me because they wouldn't let us on the plane from the bus that carried us out to the plane because one of the flight attendant call lights, I guess, was broken, so they needed to fix it.
Sure.
And I watched this guy like melting down, and I was just like, holy smokes, man.
And it's funny because you have a situation like that and you think, I think anyways, I try not to be judgmental, but we're always doing this, is like, I look at somebody like that and think, if this is what's got you worked up to the degree that you're worked up, I can't imagine you losing a big client or your wife telling you that, she stepped out on you or you getting passed over for the promotion or losing your job, like some of these more major things that I'm sure you're addressing here.
Absolutely. And that's where, and you nailed it. I mean, for most people out there, we walk through this life totally reactive. We're totally reactive to the things that come along. And not only are we reactive, we miss, oftentimes I meet people who talk about different ambushes that they're in. And they say, oh my God, I never saw this coming.
Yeah.
But the reality is oftentimes, most of the time, there are indicators. When the transmission went out on your vehicle, there was probably a little bit of clunking.
Right, and I'm like, it's nothing. Or the engine light comes on. Oh, it's fine.
I'll get to that
Don't
later.
worry about that.
Yep. We procrastinate. We ignore. We do everything that everybody else does.
Sure.
But, being proactive will prevent a lot of the problems or at least prepare you for the fact, all right, something may happen here. If I'm not proactive in fixing this, then suddenly I'm going to have an issue. And now it's not a shock.
Yeah. I actually deal with that a lot with guys who will say, with their spouses, a lot of the times it's like in our Facebook group in particular, guys will say, my wife, like you said, the word you used, I'm ambushed. Like I didn't even see it coming and she's been cheating on me. And I'm like, come on, dude. Like there's indicators. You were either too occupied with something else, which is your fault. And I'm not saying her cheating on you is your fault. I'm saying you not knowing is your fault. You were too consumed with something else to be engaged with her, or you refused to see what was obvious.
Right.
So the cheating is not your fault. That's on her. But you failing to see it is definitely your fault. There's very few instances where you're actually going to be ambushed and not see these things.
Yeah. Or how many times did she come to you and say, I'm unhappy, or we need to fix some things in our relationship. Yeah. I've seen that so many times, and, one side of the equation is blind to it and once again pushes away. Oh, it'll fix itself.
Right.
And that's one of the interesting things that so many people do in ambushes, which gets us back to that. You've got to recognize that there's a problem.
Yeah.
So for the major life ambushes, these are the ones that I say they will forever leave a physical, mental, or emotional scar on you. So you'll never forget these.
Right.
These are the ones you'll carry with you your entire life. Like you'll remember, oh yeah, absolutely, what a miserable time that was.
Yeah.
So at the lower level, it's the ending of a relationship. It can be a divorce. It can be personal or professional failure. It could be bankruptcy, lawsuit. It could be life-threatening illness or injury to you, life-threatening illness or injury to someone you love close.
Right.
It could be sexual trauma to you or someone you love, and then it could be the unexpected loss of someone close to you. One of the biggest impacts I've seen is the loss of a child. A major life ambush.
I can't imagine that.
Oh, me neither.
What a horrible thing to have to go through.
My uncle, my cousin, was a couple years older than me. I would have probably just been born, so she was about 3. And my uncle had got up early and was going to work, and he did not realize. He went out to the car and started the car, and then he went back inside, and he didn't realize she had gone out. And he went back out and got in the car, and she was behind the car, and he backed over and killed her. So, I mean, you talk about
that's even worse because I mean, I don't want to grade these things, but he did it to her.
Exactly. And I mean, one of the most devastating, I can't even imagine. I mean, the amount of pain and, you know, and I mean, just kudos to my aunt and uncle. They, and this was before I came, you know, I was so young, but I mean, I just know the story, and I know that they, through faith, through, you know, just vowing to drive forward, you know, they have a beautiful family now, but it just, I mean, it's a scar they'll forever carry. And that is a major life ambush. You'll never fully recover from it.
Do you think, well, I don't know. I mean, obviously it'll change you and you may never fully recover, but I don't know. Does that do those who learn to cope with and deal with that like justice? You know what I'm saying? Like, well, let's take your situation, for example, which I do want to get into is the injuries you sustained. I mean, physically, yes, I think it's safe to say that you never fully recovered, but would you describe your situation as that?
Okay. Yeah, no, that's a good point. So I won't say you never fully recover. You never, the scars never go away.
Right.
The scar will never go away. And you'll look back and, I mean, regardless of how well you recover from it, you will always have that scar, and you will always remember that moment and that pain that you go through when these things happen.
How do you begin to cope with that? I mean, your outlook in your situation, we're going to get back on track because I know I'm all over the place because I'm excited to talk with you about all this stuff. But you seem to have coped with your injuries really, really well. I mean, from you alluded to it earlier when we talked about the letter that you put on your door that essentially said, and I'll let you explain this, that, hey, don't come in here and feel sorry for me. Right? Like, I thought that was I actually read the letter itself, and that was a very, very powerful statement that you made, and one that I don't think a lot of people would make in the situation you found yourself in.
And a lot of that had to do with, and this is what I tell people, several things had occurred that had set me up for success. And this is why in Overcome, I talk to people a lot about the things that we can do to be proactive to build an overcome mindset. This mindset of, I know bad things are coming. Mm-hmm. One of the huge parts of being human that we can never get away from is struggle.
Sure.
I mean, it's just, we're always going to have ups and downs. We're going to have problems. We're going to have adversity that hits us. And if you have a mindset of, hey, no matter what, there's an ambush out there and I'm going to be ready for it. And if you push yourself outside of your comfort zone, if you look for areas where you can get uncomfortable, fitness is one of them. Sometimes it's identifying the things that we're afraid of, that we don't like, but maybe going and doing them. I'll dime you out a little bit. We were talking about sharks earlier.
Yeah.
And, you know, not a fan of that. So I would tell you, you know, a great way to build your overcome mindset is, you know, let's go to the Great Barrier Reef and I'm gonna get in a shark cage.
Yeah, I don't know.
So
I don't know if that's something I even have the desire to overcome, quite honestly.
But what it does is that's what builds our ability to endure that discomfort.
That's true. I could definitely see that as being relatable to other areas, right? So like if I were to overcome, for example, that fear, then how would that translate into, I don't know, public speaking, which I'm not necessarily afraid of, but other things that I may have that are issues for me.
It gives us the perspective.
Sure.
You know, it makes us say,
that makes
hey,
sense.
I've done this. So if I did that and I was...
then I can certainly do this.
Exactly. And I think that's what's key. And that's what happened. So what had happened to me, I probably was more prepared for that injury I sustained in Iraq than at any other time in my life. And when I began to look, as I was doing research and preparing, you know, to write Overcome and looking at the Overcome Academy and other people, I realized I've been through 3 major life ambushes. So the first life ambush, which is what the Trident is all about, I made some mistakes as a young leader, and I got off track as a young leader and just kind of lost my way. I both lost my overcome mindset and I lost really what it is to be an effective leader, especially in a combat unit. And I almost got myself kicked out of the SEAL teams. And I really had to humble myself, and thank God I had some great leadership that gave me a second chance. But that journey, you know, over 2 years of having to humble myself and earn back the trust and respect and rebuild my credibility within the SEAL teams was the hardest road I've ever walked. Sure. When it first occurred, I thought about killing myself. That's how bad it was.
Really?
Yeah.
Was it an arrogance issue? Like, what was it that made you have some of these poor poor decisions, these leadership decisions you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an arrogance issue. It was ego and arrogance. And it was which all came together. And it's something that I've seen happen in a lot of young men who excel at an early age. I've seen it in professional athletes. I've seen it in business individuals who have really rocketed to success quickly. You know, as when we're younger and we've achieved a level of success and leadership, we start to think, oh, we know all the answers.
Sure, of course.
And I had done very well. I mean, I came in, I was only 19 when I graduated SEAL training. I had excelled. I had done very well and got selected for a commission and went to school and graduated number one out of my program. And came back to the SEAL teams thinking I was going to be, you know, God's gift to leadership, you know, patent, hey man, you know, patent reincarnated. Yeah,
me.
Exactly. I'm going to know all the answers and I'm going to be running the best platoon out there. But, several things occurred while I was at school. 9/11 happened. And all our tactics changed overnight. We quickly realized that we had been operating off Vietnam era tactics up until 9/11, and quickly realized that the battlefields of Iraq and Afghanistan, those tactics didn't work. So while I was gone, we literally rewrote almost everything we did. So I came back and everything that I knew was different.
Right.
And instead of humbling myself and being like, hey man, I don't know how to do this, and like slowing down and seeking out, you know, advice and counsel, I just was hanging on too tight and not willing to say, hey, I don't know how to do this, because ego and arrogance, two dangerous friends to walk with.
Yeah.
And so between that, and then I did what so many men and some women, but I see this predominantly in men, do when we're dealing with massive stress and we're not living up to our full potential, we start to self-medicate. So I started drinking heavily at night and was pushing people away. This is all things I talk about in the REACT methodology. You know, when we are in a crisis, one of the first things we have to do is recognize it, but a lot of people don't want to.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to admit. So
they don't want to admit they're inadequate. I mean, who wants to do that?
No one. And it's so hard. I mean, it's one of the biggest things about leadership. We have to understand our strengths and weaknesses, and I was unwilling to admit that I was failing.
Sure.
So was drinking, was pushing people away, avoiding, and this cycle was continuing all the way up until we got into Afghanistan. And on a mission in Afghanistan, I made a bad call on a mission. We had guys that were engaged in a firefight down below in a valley. I was in an overwatch position, and I made the call to take myself and a machine gunner down to support a unit that was down in the valley floor in this firefight. A lot of people that don't understand tactics are like, well, why was that such a bad call? Well, it was a bad call because I didn't know everything that was playing out and
on the battlefield,
or
in the action. If you will.
And several things were wrong. One, not the ground force commander, but the second in charge, who was our senior enlisted, told me not to go. And he and I had a major personality. We did not like each other.
So you were like, screw this guy. I was like,
screw you, I'm going anyway. So that was problem number one. Problem number two, I was driven by my own motivation and not by the motivation of what is best for this situation.
What was your motivation at the time?
I wanted to get in the fight.
You wanted to be a hero? Or
I saw a shortcut to leadership. I saw, if I go down here, because I was no dummy. I recognized I was having issues. I recognized that I wasn't leading at the level I should be, and that I was struggling to keep up with some of our new tactics and not willing to humble myself, but ego and arrogance, dangerous friends. So I saw this as an opportunity, like, hey man, I can get down here into this fight and, you know, look at me coming in to save the day, and, you know, me and this machine gunner can provide some overwatch. And what ended up happening is we lost communications for a period of time when we dropped off into this very steep valley. And I am very fortunate that nothing happened, that we did not encounter enemy, because now we would have made a really bad situation with guys already in a major firefight down on the valley floor, with now another moving element in a firefight. And
right.
I mean, you know, I could have got this machine gunner killed. I could have been killed. On top of that, they were trying to call air support in for these guys, and now we suddenly had two moving elements.
Yeah, that the air support needed to worry about two elements as opposed to the one.
And they didn't know where we were because we lost communications.
So you put a risk of not being able to get the air support you needed.
It pushed the air support for 30 minutes.
Jeez.
And that is a eternity in a firefight that people don't understand. So the bottom line, I made it to the valley floor. We got comms again. The ground force commander was breathing fire into the radio. Get your ass out of the valley. Got out of the valley. They were able to release the air missions. And thank God nobody was lost. Nobody was injured. But what was destroyed effectively was my professional reputation at that point.
Yeah.
And
how long had you been a SEAL at that point? 12
years.
Oh, so you're not a rookie.
No.
Wow.
I was a rookie officer. I was a brand new officer.
Okay, right.
It was my first platoon as an officer.
Yeah. So there was a lot of undermining there in your own credibility, it sounds like.
Yeah. I mean, and so this is where it got a little deeper. So they basically said, that was a terrible call. What the hell were you thinking? And instead of saying, you know what, you're right, it wasn't a terrible call, I fought it tooth and nail. I was like, hey, man, I made a good call. These guys were in trouble. I went to save them. I didn't know there was air support. And
did you know at that time it was a bad call, or did this take a lot of reflection on your part?
It took a lot of reflection on my part.
So you thought it was a good call, or did deep down?
I think deep down I knew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You were just justifying it, maybe.
I was,
okay.
Which so many of us
of course.
do. So many of us do not want to admit we're wrong. And I was unwilling to do that. And I think that was kind of the final nail in the coffin. I mean, there had been all these things, the drinking, the inability to humble myself with some of the things that I wasn't learning at the same pace, or, pushing people away, all these different things. And then the bad call on the mission. And then my unwillingness to admit it was this perfect storm where they were like, send them back to the rear.
Really?
Yeah.
So what does the rear mean?
So we were fighting down in the Helmand province of Afghanistan, and we were basing out of Kandahar. So I got sent back to Bagram to where my commanding officer was, and had to go stand in front of my commanding officer and several leaders and explain why my professional, tactical, and leadership abilities were being called into question. Oof. And I got to tell you, that was where reality was starting to set in. But I think the biggest blow was the moment during that discussion where one of the guys said, I think we should take his trident, which, for those that don't understand, the SEAL trident is the emblem of the Navy SEALs. And to earn that emblem is incredibly difficult. I would say it takes the average individual 4 years from the time they say, I want to be a SEAL, to get themselves in the physical shape, to screen for the Navy, to be selected, to make it through SEAL training, to make it through all the advanced training, and then to finally actually be pinned their trident. And there's only a little over 10,000 men on this planet that have ever worn that emblem.
Yeah.
So to be told that you do not measure up and we want to take it away is an incredible blow. And when that occurred, I think for the first time, I was like, what?
Wake up call?
I'd love to tell you it was this wake up call right in that moment, but it still wasn't. But I will say it was rock bottom. Because when that occurred, my commanding officer basically said, well, we're going to discuss this. He said, report back here tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock and I'll let you know what our decision is. So I went back to my room and I sat down in my room, which was probably about, 12 by 8 feet. And on one side I had my bed, across was a desk. I had a chair, and then next to my chair was, like a 4x4 cross that we hung our gear on, when you weren't operating. So
Sure.
My body armor, and it was always ready to go, because for us, we frequently executed what we call time-sensitive targets or
Sure.
quick reaction missions. So my gear was sitting next to me, and I sat down in that chair, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is the end. Like, you have hit rock bottom, and there's no way out of this. And I reached, sitting next to me was my pistol holster, and I reached and I pulled out my P226 9mm pistol and went to put it in my mouth and was just going to end it. And I looked across the table, and there was a picture of my wife and kids. And I was like, what the hell are you doing? So I put it away, and I went and sought out the chaplain, the special operations chaplain. And I poured my guts out to him. And he kind of finished with, okay. So he said, so they haven't made a decision yet, right? And I was like, no, not yet. He's like, so tomorrow morning, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, okay, so let's at least wait till tomorrow morning, right?
Nothing you can do now, right?
Yeah. So I was like, okay.
Which is probably one of the hardest things you'd have to do. I can't imagine there's situations where I've not needed to sit with my decision, and that's a hard thing to do.
I didn't sleep a wink.
Wait. Oh, I can't imagine.
I didn't sleep a wink. And I was just wrestling with everything that had happened. I was like, how did I get here? So I went back in, and the next morning I was told my fate. Basically, we were near the end of the deployment, so we had already started the process of awards and all that. So I was told all awards for that deployment for me would be rescinded.
Oh, wow.
I was told that I would receive an unofficial letter of reprimand. And so what that means is if any officer receives an official letter of reprimand, it's the end of their career. If you ever get a letter like that, you're done.
An official letter?
An official. If you get a letter that actually an official letter of reprimand that was to go in your record.
You're not getting promotions, advancements.
You'll never get promoted again.
Yeah.
That's it. I mean, that's just the way it is within the officer corps. So what they did, and really it was a big shout out to my commanding officer for believing in me and giving me an opportunity. He put in state a solution that met both sides. Basically, I had some guys that wanted my head on a platter,
right.
And he said, hey, you've done some good things. 95% of the time you're good.
Yeah.
We just got to fix these 5% moments.
It's like justice and mercy being extended at the same time.
So, yeah, and what he did actually worked really well. I just didn't see it in the moment yet.
Sure.
Basically, so the unofficial letter, he said, okay, this will go into my safe, and it'll stay in my safe for the next 2 years. You're going to go into another platoon. You're going to be a assistant platoon commander, another go. And he said, if you're not perfect, he said, you're done. And this will then become an official letter in your permanent officer record.
That assistant platoon commander, was that to the same degree that role you were in prior to this situation?
Yes.
So you weren't demoted or anything from that?
No, not demoted. Capacity. I just was told I was going to do another go around.
Right.
So, and then the third thing, they said, we're sending you to U.S. Army Ranger School when you get back.
But that doesn't sound like a problem to me. That sounds like an opportunity.
Well, I wish I could have told you that I saw it the same way.
A little different but I didn't. In the situation.
Yeah, I didn't. So I left the meeting, and I was both happy in some ways that they didn't take my trident, but I still saw myself as a victim, that I was being thrown under the bus. That,
unjustly.
I was still trying to justify that I had made the right call. Even though deep down inside, like, there was that little voice saying, you're a liar. So I was in denial. And finally, fast forward to when I got to Ranger School, a series of different things happened. Well, I'll tell what happened, because I think it is a critical part of the story. I was still very bitter about everything that had happened. And I will say this, I mean, some people say, man, you're really hard on yourself. But I think rightfully so. I think as a man, you need to be hard on yourself. You need to be hard and realistic.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a ton of people out there that just walk around in a false understanding of who they are and a lie of who they are, and they just justify that lie.
Well, and I think there's a line between being hard on yourself, which I agree, and then being abusive to yourself. Right.
Yeah.
So because I have people that say that, oh, you're being too hard on yourself. No, because I hold myself to a high expectation or a high standard, and because when I fail, I recognize it, or at least strive to recognize it. That's not being hard. That's being realistic. That's painting me or pushing me in the best position to move forward and have success. And nobody else is going to be hard on you, right? Like, you need to be hard on yourself. Not abusive, but definitely hard on yourself.
Yeah. Decide, are they real excuses or not?
Sure.
And so that deployment, when I came home, so not only had I gotten myself in trouble, it also was the Operation Red Wings deployment. So I had come home dealing with the loss of friends that got shot down in that helicopter, a platoon that I originally was in.
Oh, wow.
When I was originally in that platoon, and they moved me into our sister platoon. So Eric Christensen, who was the troop commander, played by Eric Bana in the movie, was my boss. And the guys that were on the helicopter, one particularly, Mike McGreevy, who was the officer in charge, I had known Mike for years, and Mike had come to me when I was in school and said, hey, I want you to come be my assistant platoon commander. So, so coming home, dealing with that loss, dealing with getting myself in trouble, all of that kind of played on everything, and just being very bitter and continuing to self-medicate as I was home and, dealing with all of this and still being in denial, not wanting to admit the real reason why all of this had happened. I get to Ranger School, and once again, ego and arrogance, man. I got to Ranger School thinking I'm just going to blow this course right out the window. This is going to be so easy. I've already been through SEAL training. I've seen combat. This is going to be nothing. And Ranger School is hard, man.
Is that right? I mean, imagine. Like, that's not a shock, but yeah.
Big shout out to all the Rangers that are out there. I mean, it is SEAL training still harder, guys. I hate to tell you, it is. But Ranger School is no joke. I mean, it is no joke. And I showed up in February of 2006. And so a winter class, and it was brutal. That's a little thing a lot of people don't understand, that Fort Benning, Georgia is brutally cold in the winter.
Yeah.
And it was, we had to crack the ice to go through the Malvesti obstacle course during that first week. And I was bitter, still in denial, and really bitter about being there. And on day 3, we started the land navigation course. They got us up at 3 a.m. and we were out there on the course probably by, 3:30 or so. And I had taught land navigation when I was an instructor. So, ego and arrogance. I'm like, this is so dumb, running around the woods in the dark. How hard can this course be? I'm just going to wait for the sun to come up, and then I'm going to knock this course out and be done with it. Well, it was a no-joke course, and I was unable to finish it in the amount of time I gave myself. So you got to get 5 points in order to pass. There's 6 points total. I had just made the 4th point when time ran out. So I got back, and once again, just one blow after another, and just ashamed of myself that I didn't finish it. And the Ranger instructor started heckling the crap out of me.
Of course.
The SEALs. Yeah, we don't expect any different. You guys don't know how to navigate, and just, they were laying it on me. And in that moment, I snapped. And I told those guys, they could take that course and shove it up their ass. And my one of the senior sergeants was like, "Are you quitting?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm done. I'm out of here." So I had never quit anything ever in my life. So this is the moment I tell people, I lost my overcome mindset. It was just gone. I had hit total rock bottom. First time when I thought about killing myself. The second time when I just lost my way.
Yeah.
And so they said, "Okay, you're going to have to go see the Ranger Colonel and, talk to him before you process out." So that night I went back, and as soon as the words came out of my mouth, I was like, what are you doing? But once again, ego, arrogance, and pride, I wasn't willing to say that was a mistake.
Right.
So I just kind of resigned myself. I was like, well, your career's over. You already have made all these mistakes, that you got guys in the SEAL teams that are unwilling to work with you. And now if they find out you quit at Ranger School, they're never going to work with you again.
Yeah.
So, and this is such an interesting time, because these are lies that people tell themselves. We create stories in our minds that we try to believe are totally true. But what I tell people, it is never too late. You can come back from anything, from the most rock bottom of rock bottoms. If you are willing to climb out of the hole, recognize it is going to be hard and dark and at times lonely. It's never too late. And I'm living proof of that, because I was probably as at the bottom as possible to be able to recover from that. So
the challenge though is that, and I'm not trying to undermine what you're saying. In fact, I agree with everything you're saying. I'm just trying to think of it from a different perspective. The challenge is that the lies that we tell ourselves seem so real, especially in the moment. Like if you can pull yourself out of that situation and objectively look at what you're telling yourself, the scripts you're believing and adhering to, your actions, or if you were to see those in other individuals, you're like, what is this moron doing? But it is so difficult when you're in it. It's your life. You're the one doing it. You're the one lying to yourself. And it just feels so legitimately real.
Yeah. And so how do we prevent that? You at least have to have several trusted friends who are your reality check. You know, it's like your squad. It's your teammates. Because it's an interesting thing that, you know, we can be in the storm and we can't see outside of the storm, but your friends can be standing right next to you and realize, man, if you take one step back, bro, you're out of this.
Yeah, you'll be fine.
So that's exactly what happened. I mean, this is a fate. It's a God moment. You know, for those out there like me that have faith, I met with the Ranger Colonel the next morning and just kind of, you know, vomited on his desk this pity party story of, you know, I'm a victim, I got thrown under the bus because of politics, you know, still telling this lie of, you know, hey, I did the right thing. And he just kind of listened. And he said, well, listen, why don't you talk to, do you want to talk to anybody from your community? And I was like, no way. I mean, oh my God, you know, I'm like the opposite of everything my community represents right now. I was just ashamed. And he said, well, I'm good friends with a senior SEAL leader, and he's like dialing this guy up by the name of Vince Peterson. And Vince Peterson was my commanding officer who had gotten me commissioned, a legend in the SEAL teams. I mean, a guy that I would have done anything for. I mean, I just respected to the end of the earth. Mm-hmm. And like, so this is where it's a God moment. One, that he was friends with him. Two, that, you know, he dialed him up right there. Yeah. And three, that he was on the other end of the line right in that moment when he answered. And you know, he's like, here, you know, why don't you talk to Vince? And I couldn't say no. I mean, if it had been anybody else, I don't think I would have taken that call. But I had so much respect for him. And he was one of the greatest leaders I've ever, to this day, I still look at him as an example for leadership when I'm doing things in my life. And he has the amazing ability to take very complex problems and break them down into very simple solutions very quickly. That's basically what he did with me in that moment. And he woke me up. He woke me up because this lie that I've been telling myself that no one will ever follow me again, I'm never going to be able to recover from this. He said, you know, he gave me the greatest leadership advice I've ever been given, which was people will follow you if you give them a reason to. You know, it doesn't matter how bad you've messed up. If you continue to give people a reason, they're going to follow you because of that exact, equation. So, and then he gave me the flip side of the coin. He said, what are you going to do? How are you going to take care of your family if you come home? Because if you come home, he said, I'll have you out of the military in less than a month.
Really?
Yeah. And I was like, oh, okay, good point.
Yeah.
I had wife, 3 kids, no plan. So, and I think for the first time, he gave me a little bit of hope because I'd been convincing myself there was no way to turn this around. And for the first time, I was like, okay, maybe I can do this. So I asked the Ranger Colonel, I said, how do I get back? Can I join my class again? He was like, nope.
How long were you into this thing?
I'd only been in class for 3 days.
Oh, so you weren't too far behind the curve then?
No, but it wasn't like I started back up a week later. I had to wait a month, and I went to they had another name for it, but I called it Ranger School Jail. Because
it's like a holdover.
It was a holding company where you weren't allowed to go out.
Right.
And what you did day in and day out is I walked around Fort Benning and I picked up trash.
Yeah, because you are in Ranger School, although you're not in Ranger School, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
So for the first time since all of this happened, I really started to reflect on myself and who I was and how I had led and mistakes that I had made, and I really started peeling back the onion and I came to a starting realization about a week after all this occurred. Lots of good time of introspection while you're walking around Fort Benning picking up trash.
For sure.
Yeah. So, and I finally come to realize that there was only one person to blame for me being in that situation, and it was me.
Yeah.
And I realized in that moment that I had to change some major things in my life, how I led, how I did things. I mean, I realized that my leadership was totally flawed. I was focused on the rank that was on my collar and not on my actions. I was focused on prior achievements that had nothing to do with the here and the now. It doesn't matter what you've accomplished in your past. What matters is, those things give you experiences that hopefully you can draw from, but they do nothing in the moment if you're not executing properly.
If you're not leveraging them and those lessons, yeah.
So,
and since you came to that realization, life has just been wonderful. You haven't had any problems since. And,
exactly.
And
nothing.
And everything's great.
Yeah, nothing but rainbows and unicorns. So, but no, I left Ranger School, and it was the hardest road I've ever walked, by far. I mean, because I graduated from Ranger School didn't mean I came back. And guys in the SEAL teams were like, bro, you made it to Ranger School. It's so great. We're so excited to have you back. We know you're going to be a great leader now. They could care less that I wore that Ranger tab. It meant nothing to them.
Yeah.
All they knew, the nickname they had given me was Rambo Red. And that is not a compliment.
Yeah.
So all they knew is Rambo Red was back, and they didn't want me as a leader.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Who? Everyone? Or senior leadership?
My new troop. No, my senior leadership was phenomenal. And I have to give a huge shout out to my boss, who the day I got back sat me down and said, hey, man, I heard what happened in Afghanistan. He said, I'm going to tell you the truth. He said, I don't care. He said, all I care about is how you drive forward from here.
Interesting.
He said, so from day one, all I want to see is, you willing to learn and listen. He said, I'm going to give you leadership opportunities and, just learn from them and excel, and I'll help you. And he did. He was a phenomenal mentor, and he was really good because he looked for challenging opportunities to allow me to lead, which built my credibility and respect with the guys. I mean, oftentimes we'd be doing really complex training evolutions where he should be the one in charge as the overall in charge. And he would step back and say to the instructors, hey fellas, I'm going to sit this one out with you guys. Red, you're in charge, go. And it gave, it really over time built that credibility. So over about a 2-year period, I earned back the trust and respect of the guys.
That's interesting because you didn't come into that new, would you say troop? You didn't come into that with a clean slate. Nope. You were behind the curve.
Oh, big time.
I mean, everybody else seems like they'd come in and say, okay, well, this guy's wearing the Trident. Like we have that much established, so we'll work forward from here. But you're actually coming from behind even that, it seems like. So you're having to make up for lost ground and then catch up.
Yep.
That's rough, man.
But it was good. It was exactly what I needed. And this is where I say that God in life sometimes works in the way it's supposed to. You never know. And this is why I tell people that embrace the hardships you go through, because they are opportunities to build that overcome mindset. And it's going to be hard. Accept the fact it's going to suck.
Right.
But you don't know what's coming future down the road. And, so fast forward to this Iraq deployment, a very active Iraq deployment. We saw a lot of combat. We saw a lot of, we did a lot of missions. And it was at the very end of that deployment that I got all shot up. And what I realized is by the time I woke up in that hospital bed in Bethesda, I looked back and I wanted to feel sorry for myself for a little bit. I won't lie. I mean, I had finally figured it out. I had finally turned my career back around. I was back on track. I was going to go on to the next level of SEAL leadership as a platoon commander. I was screening for the next level SEAL command, tier, which is a very big deal. You're not even allowed an invitation if somebody hasn't said, yeah, I think this guy can do it.
Really? Who was it that said they think you can do it?
Your leadership, the command leadership.
All right.
Yeah. So you ask, and then the command leadership.
They'll decide.
Yeah.
Sure.
So, I mean, if they don't believe you have the ability, they won't even let you.
Well, I mean, they're putting their reputation on the line.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So here I was. I mean, we were 1 week from going home. And,
really?
Yeah.
Jeez. And so you were out on patrol, or what was the situation?
So we took down a target in Karma, Iraq. and a location we've been into on multiple occasions. That was a very volatile area outside of Fallujah. In 2006, kind of the second battle of Fallujah that occurred, there was it seemed like it pushed a lot of the insurgency in the heart of Al-Qaeda a little further up to the northeast into the Al-Karma area. And we started hitting that area our entire deployment. And almost every time we went in there, we got into a firefight. So on that night, we were told, hey, one of the senior leaders, or the senior leader for the Anbar province of Iraq, is going to be there at a specific location. So we went in, took down that target. He didn't happen to be there, but while we were, we found some ID making equipment and stuff like that, and we were going to blow that stuff when we noticed some activity on another house about 150 yards away and watched some individuals run out of that house and go hide. So my boss said, hey, why don't you take your team? Let's go wrap these guys up.
And how many guys consist of a team?
So my team that I took, we took... it was 9 of us.
9, okay.
Yep. Although, as we pushed up to where we saw these individuals run out into a field and hide, our team got separated. 3 guys were to the left, 6 guys were to the right. And I was
not by design.
Not by design. It was a communication glitch. Basically, we had an AC-130 gunship up overhead that was telling us, vectoring us in on these guys. And they basically said, hey, you're going to miss them. You need to turn. So when we made that turn, the guys on our left flank, these 3 did not turn with us.
Oh, so they kept going.
They kept going.
They didn't hear that instruction?
Not at first. Apparently, one of them wasn't on the right freak, or, because we have internal freaks.
Sure.
And then we have So anyways, however it happened. We quickly realized it, but by this point, there was a decent amount of separation. And guys on my right flank were like, hey, I'm on the edge of the field. These guys on the left also said, hey, we're on the edge of the field. So I said, okay, all of us, so right flank, we're going to push out. Left flank, push out. Let's move up to the north. We knew it was open ground up there, and we were going to link back up and then push back in to wrap these guys up. But what we didn't know when we did that is the individuals we saw flee out of the house were the last part of the security detail for the leader. And they had pre-staged an ambush line in that vegetation that was pointed to the north. We were south as we were moving up, so their weapons weren't pointed at us.
They were pointed north. You were coming from the south.
So when we pushed out of the vegetation and pushed up north,
in their line of fire.
We walked right into their kill zone. And that's exactly what happened. We walked right into their ambush and got all shot up. I was stitched across the body and body armor. I took 2 rounds in the left elbow. My medic took a round directly through the knee, or below the knee. One of our other guys ran forward to grab him and dragged him back to the only point of cover we had. It was kind of thousands of yards of empty Iraqi desert behind us, and there happened to be a tractor tire, kind of a large John Deere style tractor tire, about 15 yards back behind me. So the guys fell back to that. They grabbed our medic, and our other guy got stitched up the right side as he pulled him back. But
what do you mean stitched up?
Shot up. Oh, he was hit.
I didn't know
3
if you were
times.
talking about like actually trying to fix some things out there.
Yeah, shot up by the machine gun. So we were hit. So we don't know how many total. We estimate anywhere from 12 to 15 guys. 2 PKM machine guns in the tree line.
Yeah.
And then anywhere from 9 to 12 AK shooters. So just a really awesomely intense crossfire.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting word to use for it, for sure. Sounds intense.
Yeah, it was very intense. It was because I literally found myself pinned down between 2 machine guns, and like I said, hit across.
Were you behind that tire at the point, or
no,
were you in the open?
I was still out front. I was trying to lay down fire, and all this happened really quick. I got stitched within the first, I got shot up in the first 30 seconds of the gunfight across the body armor, and the 2 in the left elbow, which I thought at the time had shot my arm off. And then
so you were still firing at that point,
right? And the
with
guys,
one arm at that point,
and the guys were moving back. Yep. And then I turned to move back to the tire when a round hit me from behind, right in front of my ear, traveled
so you
through
must
my
have been
face.
turning left, heading back to the tire.
I was. Which it's funny, a lot of people that read the book, the beginning of the book, the story is told. So this is something that I did not know until later. I was convinced for probably the first 6 months that I had been shot while I was still on the ground. And I had convinced myself, and even tell the story in the book, that I had managed to kick myself in a circle trying to get my tourniquet on. But it was only after the guys got back and we put all our pieces of the story together that I realized what really happened, which we tell that story later in the book, the reality. So we kind of told it from my viewpoint,
right? And
then we tell the reality. And
did you think that was there a problem with you turning that way? I mean,
no, I was convinced I was still on the ground.
But why were you? I mean, it seems like, were you trying to convince yourself that? Like, was there a reason you would?
No, I just believed it.
You just thought that was the situation.
Yeah,
fair enough. Yeah, I just didn't know if there was a reason you were telling yourself that.
No, because there were certain. I was convinced I never lost consciousness, and the reality was I drifted in and out of consciousness after I gotten shot in the face. I was unconscious for at least 5 minutes. They thought I was dead.
So you collapsed. You fell to the ground.
Yep. So what happened is I stood up and I tried to run back to the tire. And I caught a round in the face, and it hit me right in front of the ear. It traveled through and exited the right side of my nose, so it took off my nose, took out most of my right cheekbone. What was left broke and kicked out to the right. It vaporized my orbital floor. It shattered all the bones above my eye. My eye fell into the newfound hole in my face.
Fully intact, like you have vision in that eye.
Miraculously.
Jeez.
Yeah, it's not as good as the left, but they managed to. I had to have a lot of the reconstructive surgery to rebuild the orbit and to.
Do you have to align it
yeah, they had to align it. They had to do eye muscle surgery to kind of correct it, and I mean, but I still have an eye, which is a miracle.
Yeah, I'd say considering where you got shot.
Yeah. So yeah, firefight lasted about 35 minutes, and I was literally I was laying flat on my back when I came to, and watching tracer fire travel above me.
Their fire?
The enemy fire.
Right.
So, because we did not have any, we weren't carrying machine guns. We were all M4s for the target assault.
Sure.
So I was watching the enemy PKM fire travel above me, and they were literally, my guys were shooting above me and they were shooting back.
And you were laying right there in the middle of in between the two.
Correct. Which is, and I was cognizant enough to recognize, how bad the situation sucked, but also to recognize that they couldn't come get me.
No, because that would have just put themselves at more, and if they thought you were dead, why would they at that moment?
Right.
I mean, eventually they're going to, no soldier left behind, but.
Yeah. And it was at some point there was a lull in fire, and I called out to my team leader and I asked him how long till the medevac, and he was like, what? Yeah. Red? And I was like, yeah, how long till the medevac? Because I knew, I thought my arm had been shot off, so I knew I was losing a ton of blood. And two, I knew how messed up I was. So I was like,
I need to get out of here.
Yeah. I knew I didn't have long.
Were you bleeding pretty profusely?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine through your face and head at that point.
Yeah, and the arm injury. I mean, I took two. So the one round hit me in the lower bicep and exited the back, and the other round hit me on the inside of my forearm. So they couldn't have done a better job destroying my elbow than what they did, because both rounds, the upper round removed a large piece of my humerus and cracked the head of my humerus, and the bottom round actually shattered the heads of my ulna and radius.
So was that all reconstructed then, or?
It was. But originally the doctors talked about that they were going to have to amputate my arm because I had nerve damage. I couldn't move my hand at all when I got to the hospital. They didn't think any of that was going to come back. They thought the level of damage to my elbow was too great to save it. And once again, another God moment. So I think the only reason I still have an arm is because the head of orthopedics for Bethesda at the time I got there happened to be an ex-SEAL.
Is that right?
And he was like, I'm going to save your arm.
Really?
I think any other, and he told me that a lot of the other orthopedic surgeons he was working with were like, no, it's not worth it. But he fought to keep my arm. And I mean, I've done some amazing things with this arm since
I mean, just the fact that we were outside shooting a crossbow together.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously more important and significant things than that, but
Yeah.
like holding your family.
Absolutely.
You know, but
I mean, I bring out this fact because and this is where it gets to where it's never too late. With anything, I always tell people, it's one of the biggest things I tell people when we convince ourselves you can't do something. You just got to start. You got to stop listening to that little demon inside you that tells you can't do it. You know, because doctors don't know everything. Only you will figure out what is your new 100%. And
right.
You'll never figure it out if you don't at least push yourself a little bit outside your comfort zone. If you just accept what people tell you, then yes, that's the greatest you'll ever achieve. But they don't dictate that. You do.
Yeah.
So the doctor told me So the doctor that worked on me in Bethesda, the SEAL doctor, awesome guy, Dr. Dan Valaic, huge shout out to you, Dan. He's still in Bethesda now as a civilian doctor, but Dan saved my arm. But Dan showed some of the highest levels of medicine, in my opinion, because he reached a point where he told me, I'm at the limit of what my medical knowledge has the ability to do. And at that point, my arm was, what's the word they use for it? It was basically locked in place.
Okay. So it was blood was getting to, everything was fine. You just couldn't articulate it.
I couldn't bend it at all. And they told me that was probably the best I ever was going to have. But he said, there's a phenomenal doctor at Johns Hopkins that I studied under. I'd like him to take a look at you. So I went up and met that guy, Andy Eggelsetter, and he looked at my arm and was like, well, he said, it's already fused is the word they use.
Okay.
He's like, it's already fused. He said, I'll go in and try it, but, it doesn't look good. I can't make any guarantees. In worst case, we just fuse it back again.
So you're not going to be any worse off.
Basically.
Right.
So he went in and did some amazing things. I actually wrote some medical journeys. He basically rebuilt me an elbow. And but he told me, he said, yeah, you're probably never going to be able to lift more than 30, 40 pounds. He said, you're probably going to have arthritis so bad in 10 years, you're going to need an elbow replacement. But I gave you what I can for the next 10 years. So, and I listened to that for a while. And then finally, I just started to push myself. I was like, okay, what can this thing really do? How much can I lift? How much can I do? So last year, this year, last year for the first time, I deadlifted over 300 pounds. And this year I deadlifted 365.
Wow.
So I only tell people that because I meet so many people who are convinced they can't do something because, once again, they listen to either what they believe or even what somebody else has told them they can do or cannot do.
And some of that is well-meaning too, right? Like your doctors they're not saying that with ill intentions.
No, they're saying out what they believe.
Right. And they don't want you to hurt yourselves even worse, right? Or make it worse than it needs to be. So, like, people have good intentions, but like you said, you don't have to accept that as reality.
Exactly. Push yourself. Figure out and that's something I write a lot about in the book. What is your new 100%? And that's what you got to figure out. Anytime we've been through a major life ambush, you're damaged. You will never be the same as you once were. But the great news is you can actually be better. You can be the better version of your new self based off what's happened to you. But it's a path. It's a journey to get there, and it's hard, and it's and you will be uncomfortable as you go through it, and it'll be, at times it'll be a little painful through whatever process, mentally, emotionally, or physically. Mm-hmm. But that is where the overcome mindset is built.
I want to go back to some of the things that we started with. I can't remember the acronym that we've talked about so much since then, but React. So the first one is to recognize.
That's right. You've got to recognize you're in a crisis.
Right.
So
where do we go from there?
So from the next thing you got to do is you've got to evaluate what your assets or resources are. Because once you finally come to grips, I'm in a crisis, so if we look at it from the civilian perspective, whatever it is. So we had talked about the relationship crisis. Sure. That's one that a lot of people get into. And a lot of people are in denial until suddenly it's like, oh my God, my wife's being
across the face.
Yeah. So recognize you're in a crisis and what are your assets or resources? So maybe if it's a marital crisis, it's a marriage counselor, it's a pastor, it's, we need to go do these things. It's trusted friends who can help us, whatever it is. Sure. Get that input and understand what are all the assets I have at my disposal to bring to bear on this problem.
Yeah.
The third one is you've got to assess your options and outcomes. So now that you know what your assets and resources are, now we start to lay out, okay, if I have this asset, maybe it's a marriage counselor, that's my option. What is the outcome? Well, maybe the outcome is we have a great, happy marriage. Well, do you even want that at this point? So you got to decide, is that the outcome you're really looking for? Option B, well, we move down the road and it leads to divorce. I mean, is that the outcome you're looking for? So you're just going through all the different scenarios, and then you have to decide, well, which option are we taking? One of the biggest things in an ambush, and you and I talked about this, is oftentimes when we're in pain and we finally come to grips with, okay, I'm in a crisis, we have this tendency to want to get out of it right now.
Sure.
And to reduce the pain and suffering as quickly as possible. And so many people will choose the easiest, quickest solution, which isn't always the best. So this is where it's kind of important, trusted advisors, friends, and you look through those options and decide, hey, the best outcome is for us to save our marriage, but the downside is, there's going to be a lot of forgiving. And there's going to be a lot of pain going through this process because there's been trust broken and, all these things. But
one of the hard things too is that you might have, in this specific example, somebody who's not interested in going down the same path as you, which adds a whole new layer to this thing, because then you have to come to terms with that, right? And the fact that this person's not on the same page as I am.
And that happens a lot. I meet a lot of people who it's a very one-sided equation, and that's something that sometimes we have to. What really happens, and that's what's great about the REACT methodology. Your crisis has suddenly changed from one level of crisis to really the next level, which is the ending of a relationship versus trying to fix a relationship. So
now
once
like
again, it comes back to recognizing where you are.
Yeah. Because now you're fighting a different battle, right? So you're no longer fighting the battle to maintain the marriage. You're fighting the battle for your own rights, father rights, for example, or anything.
And your mental sanity of having to accept that this is over. I mean, it's kind of like for us. I mean, it started out as a capture kill mission, but it turned into literally a rescue mission.
Right.
So So C is you got to choose and communicate. So you now have to choose the path that you're going to take. And so many people will go through, they'll finally recognize, they'll evaluate, and then they'll assess, and then they continue through that loop. They'll never choose which direction to take.
This is like that paralysis by analysis.
Yep. They just sit on the X feeling sorry for themselves. Just, hey, I know these things are happening, but I can't make a decision. So this is where we say choose and communicate. Communicate's the critical part of that for two reasons. The first reason is when you're in an ambush, you are never the only one in that ambush.
Yeah.
Other people are pulled onto the X with you. Your friends, your family, coworkers, depending on what level of ambush it is. Your kids are on the X with you, obviously, in a divorce or a failed relationship scenario. So you've got to communicate to people what you're doing for two reasons. One, you're the leader.
Yeah.
You need to step up and be the leader, because if you don't step up and be the leader, nobody else is going to. Maybe you'll get lucky and somebody else will, but that's a terrible plan to have, that you just hope that somebody will come along and save you. Yeah. There are a lot of people that have been on the X for a long time hoping someone will come along and save them. So at the end of the day, I tell people that you can bring in a team to help you get off the X. I couldn't have got off the X that night by myself. My teammates had to help me. But I had to be willing, and I had to fight for my life, and I had to fight to get up and get out of there and, have that mindset to move forward. And it's no different in life. You have to finally say, I want to get off this. As a leader, when you do that to other people, man, people are excited. They're like, oh my God, somebody, this terrible situation we're all in, somebody finally stepped up and led.
Right.
And they're telling us where we need to go. And the last component is it's accountability. When we articulate it, now people are expecting us to follow through. So you now have voiced what I'm going to do.
Yeah.
And it brings it to a whole nother level.
Now you have to do it.
Exactly.
Because you said you're going to do it.
Yep. And even if, or you should do it, absolutely. But at least now you have people that say, hey, didn't you say you were going to do this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
which I've had in my life. People have called me out. It's like, hey, man, you said. I'm like, yeah, I did say that I would do that. I better go ahead and do that then.
And there's a lot of leaders out there. We're all guilty of thinking through, I'm going to do this, but we keep it inside because no one can hold us accountable if we don't voice it.
Do you think people have a hard time on this component, the choosing component, that is because they're afraid of making the wrong choice?
Yes.
Is that why they fail to choose to get off the X?
Yep. Because it's because you're evaluating a little bit of unknowns. When we look through our options and outcomes, you're basing it off the future, and you're basing it off how's this going to look.
Right.
But that's why T is you've got to take action. You have to make a choice. You have to choose sometimes the best of the bad decisions, because it's better than just sitting there. Because here's the thing about being on the X. The longer you sit on it, it's like quicksand. And the harder it is to get off of it.
Yeah.
And the more you sit there and, just go back and forth till finally it almost gets impossible. And what I watch happen is people get comfortable on the X, and they get comfortable in their victimhood.
Yeah.
And then they just sit there and they don't want to leave, because it's easier not to deal with the problem and not to admit it than to have to go through that process.
Yeah. In their mind, the risk of them doing something is greater than the status quo, the place they're in right now.
Yep.
Yeah, that's interesting. The other thing too is in very few situations are you bound to your action, right? So if you take one course of action and you realize, let's say that's better than being on the X, but then you realize down the road, oh, you know what? That probably wasn't the best course of action. Then adapt.
Well, you start the react process all over again.
Right.
And that's what I tell people.
You're on a new X, so you got to get yourself off a different X now.
Absolutely. And you might have to do it a few times as you're moving from place to place. And sometimes that's where people get stuck, because they're like, dude, I already did this once. Why am I having to do it again? Well, welcome to life. Here's the... You
didn't do it right.
Yeah, here's the secret to life. Life's not fair.
Yeah.
So get up and move, man. Yeah. Movement is life. And that's really what the essence of the overcome mindset is. It doesn't matter what you encounter, man. You got to get up and move forward. Order of man, what is it to be a man? I think, and it was Vince Peterson who said this at my retirement ceremony. We were talking about different things, and he said, boys do what they want to, men do what they have to. And if you are a man, you will get up every single time, because that is what we're supposed to do. It doesn't, we are the leaders. You need to step up and lead. You're going to have hard times. You're going to have problems. You're going to have crisis. Relationships sometimes don't work out. Businesses sometimes don't work out. But guess what? Get back up, because that's what you have to do.
It's powerful. You stole my thunder. I was going to ask you that question. I don't even need to.
Sorry.
You brought the thunder. No, I do want to, because we are winding down a little bit on time here. I do actually want to go back to, that situation you found yourself in Iraq. You reached out on comms and asked when the medevac was going to be there. How'd you guys get yourself out of that situation?
My team leader called fire directly on our position.
So what was it that fired upon that position?
AC-130 gunship, 40 Mike. So it was,
that was your support, your air support that you were talking about?
Yes.
Okay.
So, and it ended up being, to this day, the closest fire mission ever brought in the war.
How far away?
I was only 45 feet from the machine gun that had me pinned down. So he told me incoming, and I remember hearing the gun. It makes this kind of this crumping crump sound when they fire the 40 Mike. And
you can hear that from the air?
You can hear it from the air. And came in and exploded in front of us. And we were super lucky. I think we were so close that actually the explosion and the fragmentation went over us.
Because you were that close.
Because we were that close.
Oh.
Because dust and debris all over us. And we ended up calling in, I think 7 or 8 different let me rephrase that. My team leader, who saved my life, and I owe my life to him and my other teammates. He, to this day, I recommended him for a Navy Cross, and it got downgraded to a Silver Star. Until the day I'm dead, I will say he deserves a Navy Cross.
For calling that air support in? Or
well, and he ran forward and pulled me back. He ran forward during a lull and fire, which they weren't done shooting. They just weren't shooting in that exact moment, and pulled me back. He got a tourniquet on my arm. He saved my life.
Wow.
So, much credit to my guys who did such an amazing job of getting us out of that situation, and the AC-130.
I was going to say, man, for having that pinpoint accuracy like that, just a few degrees off and you were toast.
Absolutely. And what's been neat is I've been able to go back and talk frequently to the Air Force Special Operations crews with some of the ways they did things, and now explaining to, these, dare I say, kids who are running those missions, and, to give them an understanding of what's happening on the ground, because for them, it's almost like a video game.
Yeah, because they're not eye to eye, face to face, right? That's different.
They're just watching a computer screen with little blips on it, and distinguishing between friend or foe and how they target.
I remember, I can't remember exactly where I was, but we were driving from northern Utah to southern Utah. I can't even remember who I was with, and there was a guy on the side of the road, and it was cold. There might have even been snowing, and he was in his military uniform. I'm like, what is this guy doing? So I pulled over, and I didn't know. I was like, hey, tell me what you're doing. He's like, oh, my car broke down, and I'm walking over here to get to the mechanic to see if I can get a tow truck. I'm like, hop in. So he hopped in, and we asked what he did, and he says, oh, he said, the way, I can't remember exactly how he said it, but he said something effective. He's on a combat deployment. And this is after I got back from Iraq, and I was like, oh, okay, well, are you on a leave? Like, what are you doing? He's like, oh, I'm stationed in Las Vegas. And I was like, well, I thought you said you're on a combat mission. He's like, I am on a combat mission. We do it out of Nellis. So they're flying drones in Iraq out of Las Vegas. I was so blown away. And that was, what was that? That was 13, 14 years ago. So I can't even imagine what they're doing now.
Yeah, it's
crazy.
It is. And it's incredible. Kids out there that are playing these video games, I mean, it is translating into real world now. That you're absolutely right. We have guys that are flying real world combat missions from here in the United States.
Yeah. Wild.
And whacking the enemy right and left.
Doing what they need to do.
Yep.
It's a lot safer.
It is. It'll be interesting to see what the future of warfare brings. I don't think we're ever going to be able to get away from the thinking man on the ground. If we ever get to the point that artificial intelligence gets to that point, that's a scary thing.
Well, it's a scary thing because if we have that technology, others have that technology.
Yep.
I mean, everything advances and grows, and, hopefully we stay out ahead of the curve, the United States, that is. But yeah, I mean, enemy is going to get their hands on that technology as well.
Absolutely.
Wild stuff, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. Science fiction, but it
is now, but it won't be for very long.
No, we're on the forefront of it.
Yeah, wild. Well, anything else that you would add with regards to being a man? I mean, I like the way that you sum it up. A boy does what he wants to do. A man does what he needs to do.
Yep.
Anything else?
I would just say, you and I have talked, and I am a big proponent of, there is a demasculinization of man that is occurring here in the United States of America. And I really think, I talk about this in the book, that we are losing the grit and resiliency that made this country into what it is. America was founded on this idea of getting out there and exploring and starting anew. People came from all over the world to come to the United States to basically find their way and become the American dream. And it was built on hard work and sacrifice and grit and resiliency. And every generation thereafter, I feel like, has gotten a little softer. It's become a little bit easier. And I think we're losing that. We're going down this road of, you're not a good person. If you're a man and, you want to learn how to fight and you want to learn how to do these things, you're a terrible person. Well, I mean, it's the dumbest thing I've ever seen, because it is such you want to talk about a first world problem. That's a first world problem.
That's true.
Go around the world. I tell you what, there are hard, dangerous people who don't like you. And, knowing how to fight, it's not necessarily about I want to be violent. It is about I want to have the ability to protect people.
Right.
This world will always need protectors. There will always be wars. There will always be bad things that happen. As long as one person can look at someone else and say, it's easier for me to take what you have versus try and explain to you why you should give it to me, we will always have war. So all these idealistic people out there who try and say that, I don't want my sons to go in the military, I don't want any of these things, I just think that's wrong. Encourage guys to get out there, man. Guys, there's nothing wrong with that. That's important. There's a balance.
Of course.
Sure. But I'll tell you for myself, I don't walk down the street ever thinking like, man, I really want to get in a fight. It's just not my personality.
Right.
Although I know some guys that are like that. They live to fight. But for me, I am the type of person that if I am pushed enough and I believe I am right in my views, I will fight back anytime. And that's what we need. We need men to have that mindset, that you're willing to fight for your family. You're willing to fight for your future. You're willing to fight for yourself. In my opinion, that's what being a man is. It's standing up for what you believe in and your convictions. And I just feel like there's a lot of demasculinization of men. Like, you're not allowed to stand up for that. And you're like, what?
Yeah. Strange, man. Strange time. I mean, it's interesting. It's like a catch-22, because what an amazing time that we live in where it's really optional.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you have to voluntarily decide to be a man.
Yeah.
100 years ago, you had to be a man, right? 200, 500, 1,000 years, you had to be a man or you would die.
Yeah.
And now we live in a time where you're not required to. Nobody's going to expect you to. If you're too weak or soft or incapable of doing it for yourself, then somebody else will give it to you or hand it to you or do it for you.
Yep.
I mean, what an amazing luxury we have. But at the same time, like you said, it's made us weak and soft and vulnerable to some potential threats that would otherwise, whether it's an individual or a country or a natural disaster or a violent or dangerous encounter, we've made ourselves vulnerable to those things because of the luxuries that we have.
And I'd love to buy into this idea that, all that happened in the past, but history has continued to repeat itself over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And, at the end of the day, it's about being ready. I mean, I write about that in Overcome also. I'd much rather be ready, and it never happened.
Yeah.
We used to talk about prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And I think that's what men should do.
And also, preparing for the worst is very translatable. So let's say you prepare for the worst by learning how to be physical, learning about situational awareness, learning about all these things that you know about, that we've talked about, and you never have to use that skill set. You're not any worse off. In fact, you're better, because those are translatable skills. You can translate those into fighting for a marriage, into fighting for business, into fighting a medical illness or disease or an injury that you may have to deal with. All of these things are very translatable.
Absolutely. And I mean, that's what builds mindset, by doing those things.
Right.
So often mindset gets built by the physical journey of whatever it is, whether it's, physical conditioning, or whether it's going through something that's hard, whether it's getting out there and, hunting, living off the land. All of those things, in my opinion, are translatable.
Yeah. Right on. Well, how do we connect with you, learn a little bit more about what you're up to, and give the guys somewhere to go?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to jasonredman.com, and that's my website that talks about, I'm speaking all across the country. I go out to, I'm really blessed and fortunate that I can share this story and this journey with companies on how they, how they build more resilient leaders within their company. How do you build overcome mindset within your employees? How do you build better leaders? Because, this world's hard, and we're not making it any easier. If anything, we're making it softer. We need to flip that and teach people how to be more resilient. So I'm getting into companies and talking about that, and talking about how we get off the X and drive forward. So jasonredman.com. I'm also on all the major social platforms, although I'm most active on Instagram. So if you message me on Instagram, it's actually me. I don't have anybody else on the other end. I'm there and I'm responding to you. And then I've got a coaching program, the Overcome Army, where I have group coaching. So once a week we run a class where we're talking about leadership and that overcome mindset. Right now we're going over purpose, helping individuals identify their purpose. And then if you're in a stuck situation and you're like, man, I need something right now, I've got my 72 hours to peak performance course, which is designed to help you get off the X and implement something I call the Pentagon of Peak Performance, 5 key areas into your life where you need to lead yourself to have balance and be ready for future life ambushes.
You got a lot going on, man.
Yeah, blessed. I'm blessed.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll sync it all up for the guys. Really appreciate you. Of course, appreciate your service to this country and us. And your sacrifices, everything that you've gone through, your your perspective, your positive look and outtake and perspective on it is infectious. It's valuable. More people need that. So I appreciate you, brother. Thanks for taking some time with us today.
Yeah, man, Ryan, thank you. And thanks for what you're doing, brother. I mean, the same message. We're trying to get men out there to be men. This country needs it.
Absolutely. Let's keep fighting the good fight.
Yeah, man.
All right, brother.